Welcome everyone to today's Explainer. Now, picture this. It's the spring of 2025 and two nuclear-armed neighbors are standing right on the absolute precipice of all-out war. We're talking missiles actively crossing international borders, advanced fighter jets clashing in heavily contested airspace, and the entire world essentially holding its collective breath, waiting to see if the nuclear threshold is going to be breached. For the university students joining us today, you can think of this session as a structured, lecture-style overview of a truly defining moment in modern international relations. We're going to dive deep into a theoretical case study of the April 2025 Pahalgam Sindoor crisis. Our goal here is to really understand the rapidly shifting strategic posture between India and Pakistan. Honestly, this whole event is practically a masterclass in how military doctrine, emerging technology, and nuclear deterrence all violently intersect in the 21st century.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the Pahalgam attack, move into Operation Sindoor, look at the contested claims and ceasefire, jump into the Kargil comparison, unpack the stability-instability paradox, and finally discuss redefining nuclear escalation.
All right, part one, the Pahalgam attack. Now look, before we unpack the actual catalyst of this crisis, we absolutely have to state the methodological limitations of our analysis today. This is a crucial step for any rigorous academic inquiry, right? We are relying exclusively on Indian and American sources. Think analyses from places like the Washington Quarterly and various Indian academic journals. Because of this framing, Pakistani accounts are entirely absent from our analysis today. And you really have to keep in mind that several basic, fundamental facts about this episode remain fiercely contested between the two states. From an epistemological standpoint, studying a conflict with missing data from one of the primary combatants means we simply cannot treat every single battlefield claim as absolute truth. So we're going to present these contested points neutrally, as contested claims rather than established facts, just to make sure we maintain the integrity of this review.
To ground our geography and make sure we all share the exact same specialist terminology, let's quickly define the line of control, or the LOC. This is the de facto, though not legally recognized, international border that divides the disputed state of Jammu and Kashmir between Indian and Pakistani administration. Historically, this heavily militarized zone has been the primary theater for cross-border tensions and localized skirmishes, but it carries this massive psychological weight. For decades, the conventional wisdom was that breaching the specific line with conventional air power was a massive strategic escalation, a threshold that, if crossed, threatened to ignite a wider, completely uncontrollable conflict in South Asia.
So, what kicked this all off? The catalyst occurred on April 22, 2025, when terrorists affiliated with the Resistance Front, which is an offshoot of the Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba, tragically killed 26 people, mostly tourists, in Pahalgam. What followed was a very deliberate, agonizing 15-day gap. During this window, India engaged in a fierce campaign of diplomatic isolation, rallying international condemnation, all while dealing with just immense domestic political pressure to deliver a crushing kinetic response. Behind closed doors, the military was meticulously planning their retaliation. Finally, on May 7, India launched Operation Sindoor. This kicked off an intense, multi-day exchange of drones and missiles, culminating in massive strikes on Pakistani military targets on May 9, right before a sudden ceasefire was agreed upon on May 10.
Let's move to part two, Operation Sindoor.
Shifting the conflict far beyond the traditional boundaries of that line of control we just talked about, the Indian Air Force utilized a highly sophisticated mix of Western and indigenous platforms to launch deep strikes into undisputed Pakistani territory. Just imagine the level of synchronization required for an operation like this. You have Mirage 2000s and Rafales piercing the night sky, firing French-made Scalp EG glide bombs from standoff ranges. Simultaneously, Su-30 MKI fighters are launching Russo-Indian BrahMos cruise missiles. This wasn't just your standard border skirmish. They integrated Israeli-produced Harpy and Harop autonomous drones, flying them right alongside these manned fighters, initially targeting terrorist logistics in deep-set cities like Meridke and Bahawalpur. The sheer complexity of these mixed strike packages crossing international borders represented a totally unprecedented kinetic escalation.
To really grasp the intensity of the air battle that followed, we need to define another specialist term, Generation 4.5 fighters. These are advanced combat aircraft that bridge the gap between legacy jets and fifth-generation stealth fighters. They're packed with modern avionics, active electronically scanned array radars, and incredibly sophisticated electronic warfare suites. This conflict saw the skies literally fill with unprecedented clashes between India's advanced French-supplied Rafales and Pakistan's Chinese-supplied J-10C jets. We really have to contrast this with the older legacy dogfights of the 20th century, the ones that relied heavily on visual range and mechanical maneuvers. In 2025, the Pacific airspace became a hyperlethal, beyond visual range arena, completely dominated by sensor fusion and computerized threat tracking.
On to Part 3, Contested Claims and Ceasefire.
Following India's initial deep strikes, Pakistan retaliated aggressively, which led to a sprawling 88-hour kinetic conflict. And here is where we hit a massive divergence in the narrative. Notice the sharp contrast in the claims regarding downed jets. India claims their S-400 air defenses shot down 6 Pakistani aircraft. Conversely, Pakistan claims to have downed 6 Indian jets, and specifically notes 3 high-value Rafales among them. While open-source intelligence suggests India likely lost at least 4 aircraft, the exact numbers remain fiercely unverified. But it doesn't stop at the hardware. The very origins of the May 10 ceasefire are completely disputed. India insists the ceasefire was reached bilaterally, strictly following a request from Pakistan's Director General of Military Operations. However, other sources and Pakistani claims suggest the ceasefire was actually heavily brokered through outside mediation, specifically by the United States. For students of international relations, this discrepancy is massive. Think about it. If it was bilateral, it suggests these two states actually possess the internal mechanisms to de-escalate on their own. But if it required U.S. mediation, well, that implies that without external hegemonic intervention, South Asian crises might inherently spiral out of control.
Regardless of those highly disputed kill counts and ceasefire origins, what is well-established fact in our source material is that this was a hyper-modern air war. Both militaries utilized incredibly heavy electronic warfare to jam and blind each other. Just imagine being a pilot in a jet traveling at supersonic speeds, and suddenly your radar goes completely blank. Your threat warning receiver starts screaming with false data, and all your communication links are just severed. That is the terrifying reality of electronic warfare in the 21st century. This conflict also marked the very first major combat use of the Chinese PL-15 long-range air-to-air missile by Pakistan, aggressively pushing the tactical envelope and rigorously testing India's electronic countermeasures.
Part 4. The Kargil Comparison. To really understand the magnitude of this, we have to examine how this 2025 operational response represents a massive doctrinal shift by comparing it to the 1999 Kargil War. The geographic and temporal differences here are absolutely staggering. Back in 1999, the Indian political leadership exhibited deep caution, exercising extreme strategic restraint. They explicitly constrained the Indian Air Force, ordering them to remain strictly on their side of the line of control, terrified that crossing the border would provoke a full-scale conventional or worse, nuclear war. Because of that political caution, the Kargil conflict just ground on for nearly 3 months of brutal, high-altitude attrition. In stark contrast, in 2025, the Indian military was granted a rapid, aggressive political green light to cross international borders and strike deep into undisputed Pakistani territory. And as a result of this unrestricted operational freedom, the entire kinetic phase of Operation Sindoor was resolved in a blistering 88 hours.
The crux of this evolution really lies in understanding what India learned between these two conflicts. Pakistan's air defenses had modernized significantly with advanced Chinese hardware. When initial strikes on May 7 resulted in Indian jet losses due to these defenses, India rapidly pivoted to execute SEAD, the suppression of enemy air defenses. By May 9, they integrated autonomous drone swarms to directly assault Pakistani military installations and early warning radars. Rather than risking incredibly expensive manned fighters, they used these relatively cheap drones to saturate the enemy's radar screens, creating so many phantom targets that the air defense systems were just completely overwhelmed. Once the radars were blinded or destroyed by the drones, the path was cleared for the heavier, more destructive missile strikes to follow.
Moving to Part 5. The Stability-instability paradox.
Okay, let's elevate our discussion from the kinetic details of the combat to apply a vital framework of international relations theory, just to understand the grand strategy at play here. We need to define the stability-instability paradox. This is a foundational concept which posits that when two rival states possess mutually assured nuclear destruction, it actually creates profound stability at the highest strategic level. Because both sides know a full-scale conventional invasion would trigger a nuclear apocalypse, massive wars are essentially taken off the table. However, and here is the paradox, this same nuclear umbrella creates deep instability at the tactical, lower level. A state might feel emboldened to wage proxy warfare, sponsor terrorism, or launch border skirmishes, operating under the assumption that they have impunity. They believe the other side will simply be too terrified of a nuclear holocaust to ever truly retaliate.
For decades, Pakistan relied heavily on this exact paradox, utilizing asymmetric warfare while banking on India's historical strategic restraint.
According to Indian strategic analysts like Pratap Singh, the core objective of Operation Sindoor was to finally shatter this paradox once and for all. Singh argues that by striking close to the nuclear threshold without crossing it, India demonstrated the capability to penetrate Pakistan's most fortified airspace, thereby puncturing the credibility of their nuclear shield. By launching heavy conventional strikes near bases associated with Pakistan's strategic arsenal, India's deliberate psychological goal was to call this nuclear bluff. They wanted to prove unequivocally that they would no longer be paralyzed by self-deterrence.
Finally, Part 6. Redefining Nuclear Escalation.
The literature broadly refers to this dramatic doctrinal shift as the new normal. India has effectively abandoned its historical posture of strategic restraint, favoring instead a doctrine of proactive, calibrated retaliation. By executing Operation Sindoor, India is validating its indigenous defense capabilities and sending a very clear, uncompromising signal. The prohibitive costs of subconventional terrorism will now be met directly with high-tech, punitive conventional force, regardless of the nuclear overhang. But as students of IR, we really must consider the logical extreme of this doctrine. If the new normal dictates that any significant proxy attack guarantees deep airstrikes into sovereign territory, the threshold for major conventional war in South Asia has just been permanently lowered. The automaticity of this response essentially removes that vital buffer of time that diplomacy historically relied upon to cool things down.
Furthermore, our sources make it abundantly clear that the global implications of this new normal are extraordinarily dangerous. Militarily, the conflict proved that advanced Chinese air defense systems can successfully challenge premier Western jets, a lesson that is currently being heavily scrutinized by both Washington and Beijing. But perhaps most terrifyingly, India's new tactic of degrading early warning radars with drone swarms drastically increases the risk of a nuclear miscalculation. In nuclear deterrence theory, early warning radars are the literal eyes of the state. If a nuclear-armed leadership is suddenly blinded by a drone swarm taking out those radars, they face a horrifying use-it-or-lose-it dilemma. The leadership might panic, assume a larger counterforce strike aimed at their nuclear silos is already underway, and rapidly compress the threshold for tactical nuclear use out of sheer desperate self-preservation.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to analyze in your own studies. While India definitely exercised escalation dominance in this specific 88-hour window, has this aggressive new normal actually stabilized the region by restoring credible deterrence? Or by breaking the taboo of launching deep strikes into a nuclear adversary's territory and blinding their early warning systems, have they merely accelerated the race toward the nuclear threshold, practically ensuring that the next crisis spirals uncontrollably into Armageddon? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the frameworks that shape our world.